The snowstorm roared like a wild beast outside. Captain Reese stood by the heater inside his small outpost on planet Varela 7. A cold mining moon forgotten by most of the galaxy. The windows were half covered with ice, and even his thick military jacket barely kept out the chill. He sipped from a hot metal cup, ready to shut down for the night, when a small red light blinked on his radar screen, movement just outside his perimeter. He frowned. No one was supposed to be here. This place was off-grid, a silent zone. He grabbed his thermal goggles and stepped outside, the wind instantly biting into his skin like claws. His boots sank deep into the snow as he moved through the blizzard, scanning the area with sharp eyes. Then he saw it. A figure was crawling in the snow, barely visible through the storm. It was small, thin, and holding something tightly against its chest. Reese ran forward without thinking. The figure collapsed just 10 meters from his shelter, arms curled protectively around a bundle. He knelt beside it. It was a female alien humanoid in shape, but clearly not human. Her skin was a soft violet gray, almost blue in the cold. Her clothes were torn, soaked, and frozen stiff. Long strands of dark hair covered her face. Her breathing was shallow. But what shocked Reese most was the tiny shape she held closer. Baby, wrapped in dirty fabric. Reese didn't ask questions. He lifted them both gently and hurried back inside. Once inside, the woman's body stayed curled around the baby, even as she shivered violently. Reese placed them near the heat lamp, pulled off the frozen cloth, and wrapped them in thermal blankets. The baby made a soft sound, a weak cry, barely more than a whimper. The woman blinked slowly, her golden eyes locking on Reese. She looked terrified, confused, but still alert. "It's okay," Reese said quietly, holding his hands up to show he meant no harm. "You're safe now." She didn't speak. Instead, her eyes fell to the small bag of rations on the table. Her stomach growled loud enough to hear, but instead of reaching for the food, she looked down at the baby. The child's eyes were shut tight, lips cracked, breath short. Reese understood. He moved to the shelf and grabbed a pouch of warm formula used in emergencies. He didn't know if it would work for the baby species, but it was all he had. The woman didn't stop him as he carefully helped feed the baby, who suckled slowly, weak but alive. As the child drank, the woman's body slowly relaxed. Then, something unexpected happened. She cried, not loudly, but silent tears that rolled down her face, leaving clean trails through the dust and frost. Her shoulders shook. She covered her mouth with one hand and closed her eyes tight, as if trying to stop herself from falling apart. Reese stood still, not wanting to interrupt. He had seen many things in war, but this kind of pain, quiet, desperate, unspoken, was something different. After a few minutes, she looked up again. Her eyes were still wet, but now filled with something else. Not fear, not anger, something closer to disbelief. "Why?" she whispered finally in a soft, broken voice. "You helped me." Her words were rough, but clear. Reese sat down across from her and shrugged slightly. "Because you needed help." She stared at him for a long time, then looked down at her baby. She leaned forward and placed a kiss on the child's forehead, then carefully placed the baby in the soft blankets beside the heater. Only then did she reach for a ration bar and eat slowly, as if unsure if it was real. Reese watched her in silence. He had expected solitude, not visitors. Had expected frozen winds and broken machinery, not an alien widow and her child. But now they were here as the snowstorm screamed outside. The room inside stayed warm and still. The woman fell asleep beside her child, both wrapped in a cocoon of heat and cloth. Reese stayed up, watching the radar, knowing something had changed. It wasn't just survival anymore. This was something else, something bigger, something human. Reese woke before the sun rays touched the frost-covered windows of the outpost. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a silent white world. But inside there was still warmth, both from the heater and something deeper he couldn't quite explain. He turned his head slowly. The alien woman was still sleeping, curled protectively around her baby. Her breathing was steady now, softer than before. The child made tiny movements, fingers twitching as it rested in peaceful sleep. For the first time, Reese could see both their faces clearly. She was young, not much older than 20 and human. Years her skin was still pale from the cold, but the color had returned to her lips. Her baby, small, fragile but alive, had tiny horns peeking from its forehead and soft blue skin. It looked like her. Reese stood quietly and began heating. Another meal, careful not to wake them. He placed 2 ration packs on the table, then started cleaning the small room. It had been months since anyone else had been here, but now it felt like a home rather than just a bunker. The smell of warm food stirred the silence. She woke slowly, blinking at the ceiling, then sat up, fast panic flashing in her golden eyes. Reese raised a hand calmly. "It's all right," he said. "You're still safe. Your baby's okay." She looked down quickly. The baby was sleeping peacefully. Her shoulders dropped in relief. He pointed at the food and nodded. "You need it." Still unsure, she crawled forward slowly and picked up the packet. She opened it with shaking hands, her eyes never leaving Reese. She didn't thank him with words, but she bowed her head for a brief second before eating in small bites, chewing as if each mouthful was a memory. Reese poured water into 2 metal cups and passed one to her. She drank, then finally spoke again, her voice dry and low. "My name." Leva. Reese gave a small smile. "Reese," he replied, tapping his chest. "Captain Reese." She nodded slowly. Then she looked toward the window and whispered something in her own language. He couldn't understand the words, but he saw the sadness in her eyes. After a few minutes, Leva looked back at him. "You human soldier, yes," he said, "stationed here for repairs alone." She pointed to herself, then to the baby. "No tribe, no mate, no food." Her voice cracked. She held the baby tighter. Reese's chest tightened. "What happened?" Leva looked down. Her hands clenched the cloth around her baby. She stared at the floor as she answered in broken trade speech. "Raiders, take food, kill males, burn home. I run, hide, walk long, no help, no one care." Reese's hands curled into fists. So many alien colonies had been abandoned by the big empires, left unguarded and forgotten. He had read reports by pirates attacking the weak, stealing everything, leaving nothing but ash and sorrow. "You're safe here now," he said quietly. "I have food, I have power, you can stay." She looked up slowly, unsure if she had heard right. He nodded. "Stay. Rest. Heal." Tears filled her eyes again, but she wiped them quickly. She wasn't weak, just tired from fighting too long. Without rest, Reese stood and went to the storage box. He pulled out an old fire crystal, a tiny orb that burned gently without smoke. He placed it in the middle of the room. Leva stared at it as the orange glow warmed the air. Reese sat beside her, his back against the wall, both watching the fire flicker. After a while, she whispered something in her own tongue again. Her voice had no anger, just pain and wonder. Then she looked at Reese, her golden eyes softer now. "Why? Help me," she asked again. He didn't answer right away. He thought of the years he spent fighting wars, watching his comrades die, seeing innocent people suffer while governments argued over credits and treaties. He thought of how many times he followed orders without question. Then he looked at her and said, "Because no one else did." Leva lowered her head, touched the fire crystal gently, closed her eyes. That night the baby stirred and made a soft cooing sound. Reese smiled as Leva pulled the child closer and whispered something sweet in her language. They didn't have much, not weapons. It's not wealth, not power. But tonight, inside this cold world, they had warmth. They had fire. And for the first time in a long time, they had someone who stayed. Midnight came with silence. The storm was gone, but a new kind of quiet filled the outpost, one that pressed against the walls like a deep breath held too long. Captain Reese sat by the fire crystal, staring into its soft orange glow, unable to sleep. His eyes kept drifting toward the sleeping alien mother and her child. Then he heard it, not the wind, not the baby's cry, something softer, deeper, a whisper. Reese stood slowly and walked to the edge of the room. Behind the supply crates, hidden from the baby's sleeping form, Leva sat alone. Her arms were wrapped around her legs, and her forehead rested on her knees. She was whispering a name over and over, a name that didn't sound human. Reese didn't interrupt. She didn't see him yet. In her hands was a small charm made of bones and beads, tied with faded string. It looked handmade, fragile, and old. Her fingers clutched it like it held the last piece of her soul. Reese stepped closer and sat quietly beside her. After a long silence, Leva spoke, not looking at him, watching the charm. His name was Triven, my mate. Strong, brave. He hunted and sang songs to the baby when she was still inside me. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. He died one sunrise ago. Raiders came while we were hiding in an old fuel tunnel. They smelled our cooking. He told me to run. He stayed behind with a spear. It's only one spear. She held the charm tighter. I heard them laugh when he fell. I did not look back. I couldn't. If I looked, I would have stayed and died too.
Ow.
There were no words strong enough to touch the weight in her voice. I walked 3 days, she continued, her voice hollow. I had nothing left. Only this? She looked down at her child, and this she raised the charm. She finally looked at Reese. Her golden eyes no longer afraid, just empty. Do you think he's watching us? Reese didn't answer right away. Then he nodded. If he loved you, he said, then he's still with you. In here. He pointed gently to her chest, and in her. Leva looked at her baby. The child shifted slightly in sleep, fingers curling into a fist. Reese stood and walked to the supply rack. He returned with a folded blanket and placed it over her shoulders. You don't have to carry this alone, he said. She looked at him again, confused. You help me, she said. You feed my baby, why? Sat back down and leaned against the cold wall. I used to think soldiers were supposed to follow orders, stay out of things that don't matter to the mission. But when I saw you in the snow, holding your baby, it wasn't a mission anymore. She was silent for a moment, then spoke slowly. You are different from other humans. Many passed me. They looked, but they did not stop. Reese's jaw tightened. They saw a burden, he said. I saw a mother. Leva looked down and nodded once. Then she unwrapped a thin cloth pouch tied around her waist. Inside were a few dry leaves and crushed berries. I saved this for my daughter, she said. But I want you to have it, Reese. Gently pushed it back. Keep it for her. You may need it later. For the first time, a smile touched her lips, a small, tired smile, but real. That night, Reese watched her sleep again, this time beside the fire instead of far away. The baby rested between them, making soft sounds as it dreamed. Reese thought about his own past, the orders he followed, the people he couldn't save, the quiet weight that had followed him from battlefield to battlefield. This time, he had saved someone. This time, he hadn't looked away. He glanced at the old radio console in the corner. A light blinked faintly. Earth, commands check and pulse. He was supposed to respond. He didn't. Instead, he reached for the fuel pack and added another cube to the fire, keeping it alive through the night. Let them wait. Something more important was here now. The morning sky turned silver over the snow-covered wasteland. Inside the outpost, warmth still flickered from the fire crystal, and the soft breathing of the alien child filled the quiet room. Reese had just stepped outside with his rifle strapped to his back when the silence broke, a distant rumble. He turned sharply. Not thunder engines. He dropped to one knee, lifted his binoculars, and scanned the frozen horizon. A black dot grew larger with each second to ship, flying low, leaving a trail of steam in its wake. Civilian crafts didn't fly that fast or that low. He cursed under his breath and rushed inside. Leva was feeding her baby, gently humming a lullaby. She looked up when she saw his face. What is wrong? We have visitors, Reese said. Stay hidden. Don't open the door unless it's me. She blinked, confused. Why someone come? Reese didn't answer. He grabbed his ID chip, powered up the exterior comms, and stepped outside as the ship began to land. Snow blasted in all directions as the small black vessel touched down. It hissed as it cooled. Then the side hatch opened. A man stepped out tall with a gray coat and hard eyes. Behind him were two soldiers in dark armor. Reese narrowed his eyes. He recognized the man, Captain Elric. Earth Command's logistics. Supervisor, cold, efficient, and loyal to a fault. The kind of officer who followed protocol, no matter the cost. Risa Elric called, walking forward. Didn't expect to find you here with guests. Reese kept his tone neutral. Didn't expect visitors either. Elric stopped a few feet away, arms behind his back. We got your supply request. Took a while to reach command. When the signal finally came through, they flagged your station for inspection. I didn't send for inspection, Reese said. Elric nodded toward the bunker door. You picked up a stray, didn't you? One of the nomad species. We scanned for life forms. You're not alone. Reese's jaw clenched. She was dying in the snow with a child. I did what any decent soldier would do. Decent, Elric muttered, shaking his head. You know the rules. Non-allied species aren't allowed within human outposts unless officially processed. She's not a threat, Reese replied. That's not your call. Reese stepped forward, blocking the door. You're not taking her. Elric raised a brow. I didn't say I would, but command will. They'll send retrieval officers in a day or two. When they come, she goes to processing, if she's lucky. She ends up in a refugee zone. If not, he didn't finish. Reese's fingers tightened around his belt. I'm not handing over a starving widow and her baby. If they have to go through me, they'll find that harder than they expect. Elric stared at him. Then he stepped back. You're making a mistake, he said. I'll file my report. But if she's still here when they arrive, you'll be considered in violation. The soldiers behind Elric didn't move, but their helmets turned slightly toward Reese. He knew what that meant. Next time. They wouldn't just be talking. The ship lifted off 10 minutes later, leaving behind silence. In fresh burns in the snow, Reese returned to the outpost. Leva stood near the wall.
Ow.
Her child held close, fear written on her face. Who were they? She asked. Reese placed his rifle down inside. Humans like me, he said, but not like me. Leva didn't speak for a long time. Then she whispered, They want to take us. Reese nodded once. Yes, but I won't let them. She stared at him, her voice low. Why risk for me? For a child not yours. Reese met her eyes. Because someone has to. Leva's eyes shimmered again, not from fear this time, but from something else. She reached into her pocket and took out a tiny ring made of thread and beads. She placed it in Reese's hand. This belonged to Trivan. My mate, you are not. Him. But your heart is brave like his. Reese closed his hand over the ring. That night, while the fire burned low and the baby slept quietly, Reese opened his console and looked at the blinking Earth Command message again. Then he deleted it. No. Report. No trace. He walked back to Leva and whispered just one word. Tomorrow. She nodded, already understanding. They were leaving. Together. Snow fell quietly outside the outpost, soft and slow like a lullaby. Inside, a rare warmth filled the small room, not just from the fire crystal or the thick blankets, but from something gentler, something growing. Reese sat on the floor beside. A crate, tools in his lap, metal scraps scattered around him. Across the room, Leva was gently swaying back and forth with her baby in her arms. She hummed a soft tune, the same one Reese had heard every night since they met. A lullaby from a world that no longer existed, but today something was different. The child, who had barely made a sound since arriving, stared up at his mother with wide, curious eyes. Reese looked up from his work just in time to see it. A giggle, small, sweet, alive. The baby laughed. Reese blinked, not sure he heard right until it happened again, louder this time. Leva gasped and clutched the baby tighter, her eyes filling with light. She sat down quickly, her hands trembling as she held her child in front of her. Another giggle. Reese dropped his tools and came over, kneeling beside them. He laughed. Leva whispered, voice cracking. Reese grinned. First time? She nodded slowly. He never made sound before, only cried, or slept, never laughed. The baby looked up at Reese now, tiny fingers reaching toward his face. Reese extended a finger and let the small hand grab it. The baby squeezed gently, then made another tiny laugh, this one sharper and full of life. He's strong, Reese said. He knows you're safe now. Leva lowered her head, hiding her face with her long hair. Her shoulders began to shake. Reese touched her arm. Hey, it's all right. I thought he would die without knowing joy, she whispered. I thought his world would be hunger and cold. Reese looked around the room. It was still a simple outpost, metal walls, power units humming in the corner, shelf of old rations and tools, but now, somehow it felt different. It felt like home. He stood and walked over to his half-finished project. I was building this, he said, motioning to a wooden frame. Cradle. It's rough, but it'll do. Leva came over and ran her fingers along the smooth edge. You made this for him? Reese shrugged. Didn't have anything better to do. She looked at him, eyes soft. No one ever made something just for us. He picked up the rest of the frame and finished attaching the legs. Leva watched as he placed the blanket inside, folded neatly, then carefully laid the baby into the cradle. The child giggled again, grabbing at the blanket and kicking tiny feet. Leva sat beside the cradle and touched Reese's shoulder. Your hands, they build, but they protect too. Reese didn't reply. He just gave a small nod. Later, as the fire crackled and the baby slept peacefully in the new cradle, Reese made them a hot meal. Leva sat across from him at the table, still watching her child with a soft smile. Do you have family? She asked. Reese took a bite, then shook his head. Not anymore. It passed when I was young. I've been in the military since I was 16. No wife? She asked quietly. He chuckled. No time. No peace. Just war and orders. She looked down at her cup, thinking. Then she said, if I had met you first, my life might have been different. Reese didn't know what to say to that. He stood and picked up the empty plates. As he cleaned, Leva rose from her seat and walked over to the cradle again. The baby stirred but didn't cry. Instead, he opened his eyes, looked at her, and smiled. Leva turned her head and looked at Reese. This is the first time I feel like we belong somewhere, she said. Reese stepped closer. Then you do. She reached out and touched his hand. Thank you, she said, for giving him this moment. Reese squeezed her hand gently. No thanks needed, he replied. I didn't save him. You did. You brought him here. He kept going. Leva's eyes shimmered in the effrilager. They sat together beside the cradle, not saying much. Words weren't needed anymore. The baby slept, soft breaths, steady and warm. Outside, the snow fell silently, but inside, laughter had finally returned. Reese was fixing the power relay when the console beeped. It wasn't a normal status alert. The sound was sharper-urgent. He dropped the wrench and walked over, brushing dust from the screen. One line flashed again and again in red. Incoming. Command transmission, priority level, black. His jaw tightened. He pressed the key to mute the alarm but didn't open the message yet. Behind him, Leva was humming softly while feeding her baby. Her voice was light, full of peace. Unaware of the signal that now sat between them like a silent blade, Reese stood still for a long time before walking out of the room. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The land stretched wide and white, endless in every direction, but the silence no longer comforted him. It felt like the last breath before a storm. He opened the message on his wrist console. Captain Reese, you are ordered to report and surrender. Unauthorized alien refugee at Outpost C7. You are not cleared to shelter or assist non-registered life forms. Extraction team en route. His hands tightened into fists. They were coming. Not pirates, not scavengers, but his own people. He went back inside, forcing calm into his voice. Leva, we need to talk. She looked up quickly. One glance at his face, and the smile vanished. What happened? He sat down across from her. Earth Command sent a message. They're coming, not to check supplies, not this time. They're coming for you and the baby. Liva's arms wrapped tighter around the child. Her eyes burned with fear. "They will take us," Reese nodded slowly. "They won't ask questions. They'll take you to a processing center separate. From me, your baby might be raised somewhere else, far from you." "No," she whispered. "No, I will not let them." Reese leaned forward. "You won't have to." She looked confused. "I've made a plan," he said. "It's risky, but it might work." He opened a hidden panel near the back wall and pulled out a rolled map and an old datapad. On the screen was a location glowing in green, a remote valley, far from known patrol paths. This area used to be part of a failed terraforming project. The air is breathable. There's a solar station and water supply. I used to patrol it before this post. It's empty now, forgotten. Liva studied the screen. "You want us to go?" Reese nodded. "We'll take the crawler. It's slow, but it can get us there in a day if we leave before sunrise." Liva looked down at her child, then back at Reese. "You would leave your post?" "For me," he nodded again. "For you, for him, for what's right." Her lips trembled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she stood and said, "Then we go." Reese packed quickly. Rations, medical supplies, extra blankets, fuel packs, water containers, everything he had left. He stripped the outpost of anything useful and loaded it into the crawler hidden beneath the shed. Liva wrapped her baby close to her chest, layering warm cloth over both of them. She didn't speak as she moved, but her hands were steady, her eyes were clear. She had been running for too long, always afraid. But now, she had someone beside her. Reese checked the crawler's systems one last time. The engine purred quietly. Ready as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Reese stood by the open hatch and looked back at the outpost. The place that had once been his shelter, his prison, and now. Part of his past, he walked over to the wall and pressed a switch. The console blinked once, then shut down completely. No more signals, no more trace. Liva stepped beside him. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he picked up the baby, now bundled in soft blankets, and kissed the child gently on the forehead. Then he looked at her. "I'm ready." She climbed into the crawler, and he followed. As the vehicle rolled forward into the snowy dark, the outpost behind them faded into shadow. They were no longer waiting for rescue. They were saving themselves, together. The crawler moved slowly across the frozen land. Its engine hummed like a quiet heartbeat against the endless white. Reese kept one hand on the wheel and the other on his rifle. The sun was rising behind them, casting long golden light over the snow. Liva sat beside him, the baby wrapped in soft cloth against her chest. Her eyes stayed on the horizon, but her hand rested gently on Reese's arm. Neither of them spoke much during the journey. Words weren't needed now. Every bump, every gust of wind, every mile behind them carried only one meaning: they were not turning back. By midday, the crawler crossed the edge of a forgotten valley. Green, it wasn't much, just patches of moss, small trees bent from wind, and a stream cutting through the earth like a silver ribbon. But compared to the ice plains, it was life. Reese stopped the crawler on a rocky slope and stepped out, scanning the area. No patrols, no drones, no signs of anyone, just sky, wind, and peace. Liva stepped out slowly, her eyes wide. The baby opened its mouth in wonder, reaching toward the soft sunbeams shining through the trees. "This place," she whispered. "It feels like something new." Reese smiled. "It is." He led them to an old shelter built into a small hill. The door was covered in vines, but the frame was strong. He pushed it open with effort. Inside it was dusty, but dry. Solar panels still lined the roof. Water tanks sat in the back, half full. He powered on the main system. Lights flickered. Air purifiers buzzed. A soft hum returned to the shelter, like a sleeping home waking after years of silence. They unpacked quickly. Reese set up the food units while Liva spread out the blankets. The baby crawled across the soft moss floor, giggling and chasing a fallen leaf as if it were treasure. That night, they made their first meal together. Nothing fancy. It's just hot grain stew with roots and protein cubes. But it felt like a feast. They sat by the fire Crystal Reese had carried all the way from the outpost. Its orange light danced across the walls, warming the small room like a heart finally beating again. Leva leaned against Reese, her head resting gently on his shoulder. "You did all this," she said. "You brought us home?" Reese shook his head. "You kept walking when it hurt. You carried him when you had nothing left. This isn't just my home, it's yours." She looked up at him. "Then can I stay here with you?" "Not just until danger ends, but always." He took her hand slowly and held it tight. "Always." The baby crawled over, pulling at Reese's sleeve. Reese lifted him easily, placing the small bundle of joy on his lap. The child looked up and smiled. Reese smiled back. "I never thought I'd have a family," he said. "Not after everything I saw. Not after what I lost." Leva pressed her forehead to his. "Sometimes life gives us a new path when we stop searching and start holding on." Outside, the wind softened. The stars appeared. And in that quiet shelter, far from Earth, war and rules, they made something stronger than survival. They made home. The next morning, Reese stood at the edge of the valley, his rifle slung across his back, not out of fear, but habit. He watched the sun rise slowly over the hills. Behind him he heard laughter. Leva spinning with the baby in her arms as if dancing to a tune only mothers could hear. He turned back, smiling, and walked toward them. 3 souls. 1 new world. No orders, no chains. Just choice. And they had chosen each other forever.